Welcome to On Culture. On this podcast, we talk about culture and faith and the world and our place in it. You can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also support our work and explore all of our content on our website, theembassy.substack.com. Here's Mike.
Hello and welcome. This is On Culture. I'm Mike Sherman. This is the podcast of the Embassy Substack newsletter, theembassy.substack.com. And we are going to be talking about identity. I'm here with Chad Myers. Again, Chad is pastor in South Carolina, Mount Horeb, UMC, correct?
UMC for now, which we won't get into, but I'm having an identity crisis. So
are you good? Well,
Mike's here to help me.
Perfect. Yeah. So I want to jump into. We talked about story on an early podcast, and story that we live in this big story of redemption as image bearers, as fallen image bearers. We're in this redemptive movement. And it is that eternal story that, our fallen story is connected to, that brings meaning and beauty and joy, that large, eternal timeline that we're all a part of. And identity is kind of bound up in that as well. Many of the issues of our day are circle around or touch on issues of identity. So whether it's gender, even it's male and female issues in terms of, the relationships between men and women in our culture, whether it's other gender issues, trans issues, whether it's, sexuality, LGBTQ, IA plus, whatever, politics. There's an identity. Those are sort of a tribal identity. The us and the them, race, of course. All of these, big issues. A lot of the big issues of our day are sort of identity based, or circle around. And so, I guess I want to start with that question. Why do you think that is? Why is identity such a big part of all of these cultural issues that we're dealing with and that are so important today? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first question actually is, we claim those are identities. Are those identities, respectfully? Are they micro identities based on the tribe that we find ourselves most aligned with? Is it a helpful label to say these are identities? Or is there another way to frame it that may be more helpful for, and the goal behind that would be helpful dialogue, helpful interaction, civil discourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or are these identities? And so I don't know. I tend to think that that may be one question to ask that could help answer.
Yeah, so that they aren't true identities in a sense, that we think of them as true identities is part of the problem. It seems like one of the things you're saying, that my identity isn't really my true at root, who I really am identity is not that I'm a 50-something white guy, or that I live in this, part of the country, or that I have these particular political views or religious views. All of those things say something about me, but they're not my identity. That's what I hear you saying.
Well, let's just play it out for a second. Like, if Republican is or Democrat is my identity, then does that mean that everything I think, say, do about myself and others? Because to me, an identity is kind of an ultimatizing label. So then everything I need to be about is Republican, and I'm or Democrat, and I'm wholesale this person. And for me, I think that becomes problematic, to be wholesale this one thing.
Yeah,
if it doesn't, let's just say this. If that is my identity and I'm about that, all about that, how is this an interconnectivity with other human beings?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is it immediately with that starting point? For me, it sounds like I'm divided from other
Mm-hmm.
human beings instead of united to other human beings. So that's where I think this question of what is real identity, what's a helpful identity label, because if it's this is my identity and it's automatically setting a boundary against something, that becomes problematic.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's the struggle that our culture has with identity is I would say, hearkening back to the story, where our true identity is in this eternal story and what binds us together in that story, that we are fallen image bearers on this path of redemption, that we all share that. Instead of that, we find these other markers that, since I've sort of let go of that bigger story, I'm finding these smaller stories to sort of absolutize and say, this is who I am. And almost naturally, it's in opposition to other smaller story groups that, this is who I am in opposition to you. And, in the newsletter, in the embassy newsletter that I talk about identity. I use this example of, partly I talk about the Stand with Ukraine, marker and people's avatars and stuff, and how, I stand with Ukraine, but what am I saying about putting that on my social media marker? It's really something I'm saying about myself. That's something I want you to. It's really not about Ukraine at all. It's about me. And then if you go a little farther, I quote this Twitter exchange where somebody is complaining about, they're making a point about how difficult it was to get a COVID test at this certain time because they were vaccinated. It'd be easier if they were unvaccinated or something like that. It was just some point about, the world in which we're living in. And the reply was, since you're wearing a mask in your avatar in your climate editor at Stuff, so I can't agree with you, even if I agree with you. And so the reply to this person is basically, you're making a valid point, but you have a mask in your avatar and you're a climate editor, so I can't agree with you, even if I agree. So your identity and your claimed identity and my claimed identity are incompatible, and they have to be at odds with each other. And even if we agree, I can't admit we agree. And I just feel like there's a sort of ridiculous sense in which that's kind of where we are with identity, that, oh, I guess I must disagree with you because I found out you're this in this other out group and you're not in my in group. And it just, that I don't think it was a joke. It seems ridiculous, but I think that's a serious thing this person is saying. I can't agree with you because you have these markers of this group that is not an in-group for me. It's an out-group, and I'm in a different, and so we must be in disagreement with one another. And I kind of feel like that's a lot of our culture, whether it's politics, all the stuff dealing with the pandemic, all the stuff dealing with sexuality and gender and men and women,
and the church, right?
And the church.
And the church is in the culture, not separate from the culture and not uninfluenced by the culture. So now, the church is divided. You may be in the same congregation, but you may be very divided because that person voted for so-and-so, or you didn't, you marched with Black Lives Matter march, or you didn't march with a Black Lives Matter march. And now, because you're showing your identity, right, I have to therefore be against you.
Yeah,
even though maybe fundamentally I agree with you on a lot of things, I disagree with you on this cultural marker. So therefore, I just have to disagree with you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's something that, as you say, we in the church, it should be antithetical to what we in the church should be about. And yet we are infected by that. And we do allow ourselves to be divided within a church. And In my experience, I think people would say, yeah, it's acceptable for someone in the church to have this political view, or it's acceptable to have this political view, or even if it's acceptable to have this theological view or not. But in practicality, because it's uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable cultural identity issues, people just avoid them. And people in the church just don't want to talk about. It's scary to talk about this or that or the other thing. And I really think it makes it difficult to have true community with somebody if you're afraid to talk about all of these identity issues, because you might offend, or you might find out something you don't want to know about. Like, oh, if I want to find out you're in this other tribe that I'm not in. And so let's just leave it alone.
Right.
So I guess, as we're, wrestling with this idea of identity and what it is and what it should be and what we use it for. And one of the points I guess one of the points I'd like to touch on before going to, what a true identity maybe should be is, the social media example of, things in your avatar on social media and, the various flags and symbols and so on that, that I want you to know something about me. And so I'm going to signal something to you about my identity. What is that about?
Well, trying to give humanity the benefit of the doubt and be gracious to people. I think at its best, it's people saying, I don't exactly know how to help, but
right.
this is what I want. This is what I would like to say. I don't like that there's a war going on. I would like it to stop. Maybe in a practical sense, I have given to relief funds, or I've prayed, or I've done something. But if not, at best, I'm trying to say, I don't like this, and I think it needs to go away. And I think that's a good, that's a good thing. I don't like this injustice, or whatever you may deem it as. But the other side of that is, I think often with the rise of social media, there is a tendency to want to be seen as something, but it's also, the real question is, have we got our hands dirty in service of something?
Yeah.
Like I can say I'm for Ukraine, or I stand with Ukraine, but if I haven't done anything, it feels a lot like keyboard courage, or look at me. Like, I have some friends. Let me give you this example. I have some friends, and they probably fall a little more on the progressive liberal side, politically, theologically, and that doesn't really bother me. But the question that I often have for them is this something that you like to talk about? It's the ideology that I love, and maybe I like to give these signals on social media that, I did this, or I took this stand. But are you getting your hands dirty? And the same goes for me. Like, am I getting my hands dirty in the service of something? And if I am, then how loud do I need to be about it? Because if I am, and I'm doing the work of service, does everybody really need to know? Is my question. Like, I remember Rob Bell did a podcast. He was just a brief bit. He was talking about influencers. He's like, yeah, we got people now who are paid to be influencers, and now they're influencers to try to get you to buy this product or whatever else. He goes, I know people who are real influencers, and they're doing really incredible work in the world. And guess what? They don't call themselves influencers. They're just doing the work in the world.
Right.
So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a super, it's well said. It's a super good point, because to say, I stand with Ukraine, to have Ukrainian flag on my avatar, or something similar to that, is in some sense a positive thing. It's showing support for something. It is, maybe encourages some people to also show support or do something or something. It's not a bad thing. It's just the problem is uh, if that becomes a oppositional thing, A, and B, if that becomes a substitute for some real action in the world. If you begin to think that I'm doing real action and I'm getting my hands dirty by posting this avatar, or whatever it might be, by denouncing this, even forget the avatar, by denouncing this evil on social media, if I really think that's getting my hands dirty to actually affect change in the world, then I'm mistaken. And that's really, I want you to know I have this moral high ground. I want the world to see that. I want to think that about myself. I want to think I'm doing good and combating something, but really, you know, I'm not. It's easy. I'm just typing. My in group is going to like me. The out group I don't care about. It's
Yeah.
furthers divides. And so something that you can be sort of right about, and there's some healthy version of this interaction, which might be good. But if it's really more about, I want you to know, I want everyone to know where I stand, who I am, that I'm not them, that I'm against them, and that is morality, that is getting my hands dirty, then that's a problem, because we're not actually doing good in the world. Yeah, it's one thing if you want to denounce the excesses of Jeff Bezos, to pick a person, and there might be excesses, and some of them might need to be called to attention, but that's not actually helping poor people, and that's not actually hurting Jeff Bezos, who couldn't care less. It's actually not doing anything in the world. Denouncing the rich doesn't feed the poor.
Yeah. So yeah, if I really care about the poor, go feed the poor.
Go feed the poor. Feeding the poor feeds the poor.
I'm responsible. Like, what about my financial situation?
Correct.
Am I sacrificing anything to feed the poor? Because by the global standards, I'm Jeff Bezos.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right.
Right. If I'm looking at if someone, and
might as well
you and I've been to Africa, we talked about it. I might as well be Jeff Bezos, because I got 2 cars, a house with a finished basement, and water, and food, and plenty of things. So, and this is where I think, again, the impetus is not bad. Like, use your voice. I think people do need to use their voices, but I think we're getting to a place in the world where it's one voice among million and it's white noise. Like, how about use your body? Like, just do something.
Use yourself. Yeah. Be the person that you are presenting yourself to be, or thinking of yourself as. And, some people don't post a lot on social media, but they identify with this side of the posters against that side of the posters. And I think there's a danger in that that does something for you, that makes you feel a certain way. And that's, this makes me feel moral to be on this side, which is the right side, against that side, which is whatever. And, what we're called, who is my neighbor is the question the Pharisee asked of Jesus, right? And Jesus gives the answer that brings the Samaritan into the equation, the last person they would think of, the last person they would want to be the neighbor for them or to them, is the one obviously Jesus picks. And, the one who actually did stuff, who actually stopped, right? Spent time, effort, money, concern. And we can be like the people walking by the side of the road and showing disdain. And there are, disdain might be warranted, but that isn't actually doing anything in the world. And I do think that's when it comes to all of these various identities, or so-called identities, as you point out, it's not bad to recognize that I have this background, I'm from this whatever, I have these beliefs, all of that might be true of me. But if I'm doing that as a shield against something, or as a way to, make you feel a certain way about me, or feel a certain way about myself, because what that tends to then do is people who are not in this group become the opposition. And, what's the tragedy of our times is that particularly people in the church ought to have relationships with trans people, with gay people,
Atheist,
with
agnostic,
atheists,
gay,
with
yeah.
people on the opposite side of the political spectrum actually should be in community with and have conversations with and get to understand and find common ground, whether they're believers or unbelievers. And because this eternal storyline is the part that really matters, and particularly within the community of faith, that I should recognize, even though it doesn't seem like it, and it will sound crazy, that I have more in common with a Chinese believer, huddling in an apartment somewhere in secret, than I do with somebody who's 3 houses down who's not a believer, because the community of faith is that eternal through line. I'm going to spend eternity with one, potentially not another. And that there's a sense in which there are things that supersede all of these superficial boundaries that we want to make. And do I live as though that's the case? And that's uncomfortable. That's countercultural. That people will think things about you that, well, oh, you're just like Jesus. Oh, you're having dinner with these sinners and these prostitutes and these tax, these oppressive government tax agents that cheat us. And the answer is, yeah, he was. And am I willing to do that? And if not, why not? And part of it is I don't want to be associated with them, because I want to be us, which is the whole identity thing, right? And I just think that's super challenging. And it's not just challenging for people in the community of faith, but it is especially challenging, for us, because we don't want to think that the Samaritan actually would stop and help us, right?
Yeah. I mean, what is that? Is it actually like fear? Like it's not just like you pointed out, I'm afraid of what other people might think about me, but am I actually afraid of that person? Maybe I am.
Partly, I'm sure.
Maybe I'm afraid. Maybe I'm afraid of the conversation. Maybe I'm afraid of, what is that fear? I'm afraid that if I talk to you, what?
Mm-hmm.
You might convince me otherwise, and my understanding of God or the world isn't big enough to be able to have you in it. I don't know.
I think that's a super good question that we should probably ask ourselves. What is that? I think partly it's, I want to think the Samaritans are bad people. The world is simpler if I know who the good people are and the bad people are. And yet in the big story, we're all fallen image bearers. All of us have some badness in us. All of us have some image bearing in us. Somebody who's completely different from me can love me well, and somebody who's pretty in my in-group cannot love me well. And the world's complicated that way. And I'd rather think of it as simple. And right, I know who safe people are. Those people aren't safe. So I do think fear is the right word. You use the word fear. And we might not feel physical fear, but fear enough to feel uncomfortable. I'm afraid my worldview is going to be challenged. I'm afraid I'm going to find this person is actually loving. And that'll just complicate everything. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd much.
They just wanted to burn the world down.
Right. I just thought they,
maybe they don't.
Maybe they don't. And I do think that's part of the whole identity in-group, out-group thing. It's not just bad for how I view the in-group, which is, I will let all sorts of things go in my in-group that I should challenge. But it's easier to think of these people as bad people that I don't have any obligation to or for, and that certainly wouldn't have anything to offer me. And it just drives us further apart. And, I do think partly it's a safety. Yeah, so fear. I think fear is right. I think it's a safety. These people are unsafe.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you and I can be unsafe with each other because we're fallen, broken people. and people that I might think are unsafe might be, you know, great friends, resources, or whatever, if I would just actually love them as I'm called to love them, to love my neighbor. Because that's the point of the Good Samaritan is to answer the question, who's my neighbor? And the answer is everyone, but especially it's the people you wouldn't pick to be your neighbor is your neighbor.
Yeah.
And you're called to love your neighbor as you love yourself.
So I know we're short on time, or we're coming to a time, but is there a framework that if these are not necessarily the ultimate identities, is there a framework that gives us more of a common ground identity to say, instead of pursuing our differences, like to pursue connection with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if I can think of a little bit bigger picture, that we have a shared humanity, that there is common ground, that we all appreciate beauty, and we all need to be loved, and we all can love one another, and that we all want truth and justice. We might have different ideas about what those things are, and some of us might want them more than others. There are differences. But if we define ourselves by our differences, we're going to be down this rabbit hole that we're in. And so, in the bigger picture, if we step back, there are commonalities that we're called to, and that's what we see. In Jesus's life, he appeals to the genuine human needs people have, and people respond to that. And he's not worried about getting cooties from those people, and because he doesn't view, the remarkable thing is he doesn't view this, there's this big unbridgeable gulf between this person and this person. And I think just to examine, why do I want to feel that way? And I do think the sense of I want to simplify the world. I want to be the right, the good. And sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I'm 70% right. And to live in that world is a little scarier. But I think that's the thing, is, can I see people as fallen image bearers that God loves, that I'm called to love? And what is that going to demand of me is a whole different approach of the world than to see myself as a much smaller group. I guess I don't know if that's a good answer to the question, but that is my answer to the question. So I don't know what your thoughts on that.
No, I think I think the reality is, on a larger scale, let's say even if you come from a materialistic point of view, and at some point down the road, it's going to be challenging, but there's a shared humanity. There's a shared need for security, and there's a shared need for peace and provision. So let's just say you have very different people trying to carve out a civilization, small society civilization on a barren island. Well, everyone would agree we need shelter, we need food,
right,
we need some system of politics to organize how we make decisions and get streets built and where the money goes and all these things. And there's a sharedness of this. Most people, like you said, no, I'm not for war. No, I'm not for injustice. No, I think poor people, we need to take care of them. And I think the rich should be generous. How the house looks might be very different, but at the fundamental level, we agree on these things. Most humanity are not just out to commit crimes and cause violence. Right? There's a pathological side of people that's different. Right. I'm talking about your neighbor. For the most part, they may just want to eat in peace. You know what I mean? So you get that. I get that. There's a common shared humanity, and we would say, coming from the big story of creation, that we're made in the image of God. We're image bearers. That's our primary identity, and I have that in common with every single human being.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think so. Searching for how do I live in that sense, in that reality, being curious about the world, being humble about what I need to learn about people. And all of that just strengthens, I think, who I really understand myself to be, instead of weakening it. And so, in a sense, to live fearlessly in that way will help us to live out our true identity. and to see other people in other groups as not the other, but as fellow human beings that we're called to be together with in society, and in some cases forever. So let's end it on that note here. This edition of On Culture. Thanks for listening. You can find On Culture wherever you can find podcasts, and invite you to check out the Embassy Substack newsletter, the embassy.substack.com. And especially if you're in the church world, invite you to check out embassyequipping.com, where there's resources for cultural engagement and leadership development. And so I invite you to check all of those things out. Until next time, thanks for listening to On Culture.
Thanks for listening. Do you enjoy On Culture? You can support us and the content produced by subscribing to our newsletter, The Embassy, by visiting theembassy.substack.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.